Welcome to the Story Partners Podcast, a member of the Proclaim Podcast Network. I'm Annie Manus, and we're so glad you found us.
The windshield was shattered. There was somebody still in the vehicle behind me, that he was still buckled in. I'm terrified. It's dark. I'm in this vehicle that's not mine, and I'm unable to process things.
Matt Slavik was a brand new teacher in Midland, Texas. With a carload of kids, they strike out for a school trip to Zion National Park. Everything was going fine until an absolute nightmare becomes their reality. This is Season 2, Episode 12, The Road to Freedom.
I'm an identical twin, and so I always had kind of a built-in best friend. So we grew up playing baseball, basketball, soccer. My brother and I were very close up until about 14, 15, but we just, there was always somebody to play with. Our dad worked nights, but he was at 98% of whatever activity my brother and I were doing. Faith was never talked about. My mom tried to get us to go to church, that's my recollection, and we just didn't want to. I mean, for me personally, I don't know what my brother was thinking, but I just thought, God, the Bible, that's for old people, and I'll wait till I'm 60, and then I'll start worrying about who God is. My brother was always very confident. He was able to make a mistake, whether it be a bad grade or a turnover in basketball or something, and just would forget about it, move on. I made a mistake, and everybody's going to know about it. I'm going to hang my head. That's how it was growing up. When we were younger, 8, 9 years old, we had an uncle that my parents would drop us off at his house, and he would watch us for a weekend. At some point, he decided that he would kind of give us a birds and the bees talk. And part of that was he introduced us to pornography at that age, and then this happened a couple times, but he remember waking up in the middle of the night, and he was touching me inappropriately, and once I woke up, he sort of backed away and went to bed. I thought it had just happened to me. I assumed nothing happened to my brother, so it was easy to assume that that my uncle saw something in me that was weaker or less than my brother or not as good, and so he could do that to me. And so I'm the weaker twin because it only happened to me. So that was absolutely huge in me holding on to feelings of inadequacy or being less than, or putting my brother up on a pedestal and just thinking he's the stud and I'm the dud. I think that's what springboarded me into low self-esteem, low self-worth. My brother's always going to be better than me. Yeah, I'm just the lesser version of Mark. Pornography became this, I don't know if crutch is the right word, but this thing that I would run to if I felt overwhelmed or if I felt anxious or, it was more about these deep-rooted insecurities. Well, and I knew how to go soothe myself if I needed to. Certainly when the abuse happened by my uncle, that was something I couldn't control. And this pornography is something I can control when it happens and the scenario, and just I can control every little. There's zero vulnerability with pornography on my part. It's absolutely a controlled environment, and so it felt like whether I was anxious or sad about missing a shot in basketball or something, I could go back to this controlled environment and soothe myself and pretend like those negative things don't exist for a little while. If I feel bad, I know how to go feel good. Why would I not keep going back to that thing? The ditch kept getting dug deeper and deeper and deeper, and so it just became very much a part of life. The latter parts of high school, my brother and I sort of became friends with some people that were pursuing the Lord. And so in college, God put my brother and I in a dorm with a bunch of believers. And so sort of hiding this life of pornography, this secret life, I guess maybe became more convicting and just more difficult. And because I had all these friends that were inviting me to church and Bible studies and would do crazy things like pray before a meal, and ask how I'm doing. And so because of that, I just started having questions about faith and about God. But I had this secret life that I didn't want to get rid of. I met with one of my friend's dads who kind of asked me a bunch of questions and led me to the Lord. For a few years, it was this back and forth of, this thing is so familiar in my life, this pornography. I don't know how to get rid of it, but I feel like God's calling me to a higher standard. And if I love the Lord and trust Him, why am I doing this other thing that's so cheap and not real? At that point, I became pretty legalistic, and I need to white knuckle and try to get rid of this porn thing. I would often have these slip ups, and just felt like, well, God just hates me, or not hates me, but God just is very displeased with me, and I keep doing this thing to mess up, but I don't know how to not. In my mid-20s, I was living in Texas, and my father suddenly passed away. He was 61, had a stroke, completely out of the blue. That rocked my world. There was a lot of guilt on my part, a lot of shame. I felt like I wasn't a very good son to my dad. I didn't tell him I love you enough. I didn't thank him for all the countless things he had done for my brother and I. And so that unfortunately took me to a kind of down a dark path, and porn ramped up and alcohol ramped up, and I didn't know how to deal because I'd never processed through feelings before. And so I just didn't process. And there were some great friends in my life that were constantly checking in with me and asking how I was doing, and just noticed. But I struggled for a while with that. I just wanted to escape, and I knew how to escape with pornography and alcohol. I saw God's love as conditional. I needed to do the right things to earn grace. And if I didn't read my Bible every day for a certain amount of time, or if I missed Wednesday night church or whatever, then God was just a little displeased with me. God loves me. I know God loves me, but I don't think He likes me very much. Like, I've got to hide from Him until everything's okay, and then we can come back together. I could hold on to any potential negative that someone said. Even if it was sarcasm, I could twist it and think, well, no, they really think this about me. They really do think I'm an awful person. Or I would replay in my head all the negative things. You're the less than twin. You're not as good as Mark. And here's why, whatever those reasons were. I got to a point where I just had enough, and so let's go numb out for a little while. After my dad passed away, there were a few months where I came back to Arkansas from Texas, and I ended up talking with a friend of mine who was a camp director, and he offered me a job at this camp that where he was working, and so I was at this camp. I ended up meeting a dean of a small school out in West Texas, and he sort of recruited me to come work at this school called Midland Classical Academy, or MCA. And so I started doing that fall of 2012, yeah. And so I moved out to Midland, Texas, knowing nobody except for this dean that I'd interviewed with, and I didn't know families. I was as green as could be, and I'd never taught before. I've got a psychology degree, so teaching wasn't necessarily in the books for me, but. So I'm at the school, and I'm there for maybe 3 weeks. So getting acclimated to the school, acclimated to the town of Midland, which is a desert, and I wasn't used to that. But after the first week of school, This school has what's called the Adventure Club trip. So every year it was, we're going to pick a new place and we're going to leave Labor Day weekend that Friday, drive to this place, hike around, and just kind of explore. So the year I was there, my first year, we were going to Zion National Park in Utah. So there was about 40 of us or so, and we were caravanning. So there were, I don't know, 8 vehicles. And my SUV was myself, a dad, and then 4 students. And the dad was a father to one of those students in the vehicle. We left at about 1 p.m. Around 9 p.m., I took over driving the vehicle that I was in. And so around 10 p.m. in my car, everybody fell asleep. And I remember thinking, I'm good. I've got a couple Red Bulls. The radio wasn't on, but I kind of thought I don't need it. And I got us a little bit off course. So we were still heading to Zion, but we were on a route different than everyone else. We are driving and just kind of making miles on this road. And at about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, I wind up falling asleep. I'm hitting the rumble strips on the side of the road. That jolts me awake and I correct to the left. And as I correct to the left, I start going off the road on that side. And so then I go to correct again. And when I correct that time, the vehicle starts to flip. I get knocked out, and that's the last thing I remember until I wake up. The windshield was shattered. There was somebody still in the vehicle behind me, that he was still buckled in. I'm terrified. It's dark. I'm in this vehicle that's not mine, and I'm unable to process things. So I kind of just faintly said help, and some guy walked to my side of the car and got me out, and I'm just kind of rubbing my head and what happened. And he's being really cryptic and he's not really saying much. His response was it was something along the lines of, oh, whatever happened and it can't be undone. And I just remember thinking, all right, that tells me nothing, but okay. And so this guy that gets me out of the car leads me to one of the students who's laying on the ground, and he's looking up at me smiling. And so this guy sits me down by him, and again, I'm like, what happened? Can you just tell me? And it's nothing, like another cryptic answer. And this student that was laying on the ground looking at me or smiling at me, he and I get in the same ambulance. And so I asked the paramedic what happened. And this paramedic just kind of bluntly says, I'm going to tell you right now, 2 people are dead. I remember just shivering. And I remember thinking, this is my fault. I was driving, I fell asleep. And now because of me, 2 people are dead. I thought, I'm going to jail for the rest of my life. We get to the ER and I learned, so I know that Colby's with me. I learned that the dad was getting flown to Flagstaff. And then another boy gets brought in right after us. And so I knew which 2 boys had passed away. I'm laying in this bed and I'm crying, and I don't know anybody. It just maybe was the most alone that I had felt ever. I was coughing a lot, so the doctors thought I maybe had a collapsed lung. So I go get a chest x-ray. My x-ray tech, whose name is Richard Rice, one of the things he encouraged me to do was to write. As much as he was like, you're not going to want to, but for the next several weeks, months, write all that you're feeling, all that's going on, because like you will want to look back on that later, and maybe that'll help you process. And so I do a chest x-ray, and the doctor or nurse, comes up to me and basically says, hey, there's something, you're right, your kidneys popped up on the x-ray. It looks like there's something on your right kidney. It could be cancer. You need to get it checked out. See you later. Which was like, thanks for putting the cherry on top of this wonderful, wonderful evening. So now that's in my brain too. And I thought, I'm not going to tell anybody what I deserve. My narrative was, I just killed 2 people. I need to let this cancer grow. That's what I deserve. I deserve some pain and maybe a very slow death. And so I'm just not going to tell anybody, because that's what I get, The 2 boys that passed away in the accident, Bryce Kerrigan, he was 14, and then Bob Henson was 18, an 8th grader and a senior. We eventually are all able to sort of fly out on these smaller jets back to Midland, and this other parent walks up to me and says, "Hey, you may not want to, but whenever you're ready, the Kerrigans want to meet you whenever you can. So here's my number, let me know." So that the accident happened Saturday morning, 2 a.m. I was at the Kerrigans' house that following Monday or Tuesday. My heart was beating out of my chest because I didn't know what I was supposed to say. And I thought I deserve some kind of wrath here. We get up to the house and people are coming and going. Mr. Kerrigan's sister had an iPad and she's just making a note of everyone that's coming in, and people I'm sure are dropping off food or whatever. And she asked for my name and I tell her, and my brother remembers this better than I do, but apparently she almost dropped her iPad because she realized who I was. Mr. and Mrs. Kerrigan noticed that, and they kind of beeline for me. There wasn't really time to react or do anything. They're both hugging me, and they're both telling me how much they love me and they forgive me, and they don't want me to carry any guilt or shame or weight. They said they knew it was an accident. They knew where Bryce was, and that's all they cared about. Mr. Kerrigan prayed for me, and my brother, he remembers the scene as extreme grace, forgiveness. There was even a little bit of laughter in there. Me and my family left with our jaws hitting the floor, just going, "What happened? That's not normal." They should have been upset with me, but they really loved me through that. That doesn't happen apart from Jesus. Like you can't respond that way. The Kerrigans found out that something was on my kidney and it needed to get checked out. And so Mrs. Kerrigan, once a week would just shoot me a text. "Hey, what's going on with your kidney? Have you gotten your kidney checked out yet? Why haven't you gotten your kidney checked out yet?" And eventually it got to a point where I was like, I can't keep pushing these people aside. At the very least, I deserve them a doctor's visit. So I go get it checked out, confirm that it's cancer. I'm going to have surgery in Midland, Texas, and 2 of the board members of the school pull me aside, I think 2 days before I was supposed to have surgery, and said, "Hey, go get a second opinion. Do you want to go have surgery from a doctor that does this once a month or one that does this 5 times a day? You should go to MD Anderson in Houston." And so this community that lost their boys and just things are in disarray, kind of this stranger comes in, rather than pushing me away, they're bringing me further into the fold and loving on me and reminding me often that I'm forgiven, that I'm cared about, that I'm seen. It was all just, "Hey, we love you." And they said, if it's money, we're covering it. So they paid for flights. One family actually paid for my surgery. There was a lot of, I don't quite understand. And I think it probably came from a place of, I'm really good at beating myself up, self-deprecating. What I deserve for them to be mad. When I didn't deserve it, because I never did, they reminded me how loved and how forgiven I was on repeat. There's nothing that I could do to earn their favor or their love, but they're giving it to me because they're choosing to. God's loving me through them. He's showing me grace through them and what forgiveness looks like through them. There is no doing that apart from the Lord. There was zero doubt in my mind that their actions were reflective of God's love. Yeah, 100%. Just the way that they loved on me, it rubbed off on me too. And it's like, well, that's an authentic, real relationship with Christ. I want that. What I've been doing for the past 6 years, 7 years, that's not a real relationship with the Lord. My 6-week checkup after I had kidney surgery, I remember coming back from that and just thinking, okay, I don't think I'm no longer Matt, the guy that had the accident. It was a big event and it was a big thing to happen, but it was just this thing that happened. It didn't define me. I continued teaching, and I would say all the kids, even some of these kids, and they had low moments, and we would talk through them, but they didn't treat me any differently than the rest of their teachers, or at least I didn't perceive it as different. And so it's like everyone around me is forgiving me. Why would I hold on to this bitterness and self-deprecate and not forgive myself? Pornography was still, unfortunately, part of the equation, just not to the degree that it had been. In a weird way, I had a roommate at this time, and we literally shared a bedroom, and so that probably helped curb some of this pornography stuff. But then I started becoming closer with guy friends, and we would just talk more openly about that struggle. And so it was decreasing in how often it happened, but it was still around. It took me several years. And I would say I didn't really find freedom from that, unfortunately, until about 2019, which is fast forwarding a few years. But back in 2019, I just had sort of had enough, and was like, I've tried accountability things, I've tried website blockers and apps, and they all work to a degree. But I had never tried this thing that I was most fearful of. I had heard about this thing called Celebrate Recovery for a decade. And the thing that always kept me from walking through the doors was fear. And so I had emailed this pastor, and we talked on the phone, and he just kind of, come Tuesday night and we'll just see what it's about. So I remember sitting in the parking lot of the church for about half an hour, and because I was too afraid to go in. So I called this pastor, and he said, "Hey, are you lost?" And I said, "No, I'm in the parking lot, and I have been for a while." And he said, "Just come in, I'm the tall guy." And so we hang up the phone, and I remember thinking, I'm committed, like he's expecting me to walk in. And if I go in, I want to cannonball into the water. I don't just want to dip my toe in. So it's like, whatever is the process, I'm just going to do the process. People are getting up and they're saying, "Hey, I'm a grateful believer in Jesus, and I struggle with whatever." And so I say, "I'm a grateful believer in Jesus, struggle with porn, anxiety, low self-esteem, codependency. My name is Matt." At the end of the worship time, they have what's called the blue chip call, or surrender chip. And it's sort of the first step. You walk up and get it, and people are clapping for you, and it's sort of saying, all right, I don't know what this path looks like, but I want to take this first step. I'm surrendering this hurt, hang up, or habit, and I want to move forward. Once I had a couple conversations about pornography with somebody, and there was a not pushback or not a disgusted look or something. That happened a couple times, and I thought, man, maybe this is a good thing. Maybe more people struggle with this than I thought. It's not just me. And so, yeah, after doing that a couple times, it just became easier, because I guess I just sort of realized that a lot of people struggle with this, and I'm not some weirdo or sicko or whatever. And it's so much better, not easier, but better, to be vulnerable and just say, "Hey, I'm feeling this way. This happened." But then that gives somebody else who's listening permission to say, "Oh, me too. I needed to get this weight off too. So here it is." Rather than running to pornography and wanting to process that way, I had to process by reading scripture, prayer, and by talking with these men or these women in my life at that time. And so I think that's where I begin, like the shift as far as pornography began to like, oh, I think pornography is not like the thing that helps me process, or it's not helpful at all. What's actually helpful is when I can be a little bit vulnerable and tell somebody I'm struggling, and let them listen to me. It wasn't gone completely, but those next few years were this kind of learning how to be vulnerable with another friend and allowing them to catch me. There was these times when people would walk up and collect a chip that represented a time amount. So 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, a year, 5 years, whatever. One guy in particular who's, I think, 12 and a half years free of pornography. And he's I think one of his bigger sayings is, I'm either working on my recovery or I'm working on my relapse. Working the steps through Celebrate Recovery and then doing what's called a step study, which is it's about a 9-month to a year process of sort of digging into past and what led you to CR, to Celebrate Recovery, and learning like past behaviors and just what, like obviously for me, pornography wasn't the issue. There's a root, and so it's this low self-worth and low self-esteem and this abuse by my uncle and just not knowing how to process things. I had an interaction with the Mr. Kerrigan, 8 years after the accident, 9 years after the accident, and I remember meeting him at a coffee shop, and I was living in Arkansas, back in Arkansas at the time, and he hugs me, tells me he loves me, he pays for my coffee, and we talk for an hour and a half, and it's great. And near the end of it, I start getting teary-eyed, and I said, Danny, I'm starting to get emotional, and he asked me why, and I just said, all these things are flooding back, right? I said, you should have no reason to want to ever sit across a table from me and just talk. But not only that, you gave me a hug, you told me you loved me, and you paid for my, $3, but you paid for my coffee. And so like that, just the fact that you're willing to do that, and you should be just indifferent. You should not care about me at all. But that's how God is. I give him a million reasons every day to never want to sit across a table from me, but he goes beyond, tells me he loves me and gives me a hug and pays for all my sins. And so that was a really great reminder not too long ago that I got to have. It's in the past, it was one thing to read about grace or read about forgiveness, but I had this very, very tangible, unique experience where I got to really see what grace looked like lived out and what forgiveness looked like lived out, and what it meant to, or what it means to love like Jesus, because that's what this whole community did and still does. When Satan's wanting to really dig in and get his foot in the door and try to remind me of just old ways of I'm worthless and I'm less than my brother, or I'm less than whoever. Whereas in the past I isolated and just internalized and just let those thoughts ping around in my head. Now I might do that, but it's for 24 hours, and then I'm telling somebody about it. I've got great accountability partners and a great sponsor, and honestly, being married too is a help. I'm still learning how to communicate with my wife, but I just have recognized I'm not great at keeping negative thoughts in and processing through them internally. I have to get it out, and the way I get it out is talking to a buddy. And usually just talking about it, I can see, that's not a good thought. But then too, my friend, whoever my friend is, always has some wise word to offer me to, and if nothing else, they've got 2 ears that can listen and they're available. So in the past it was isolation, and now it's like, well, I'd rather be vulnerable, and here's what's going on. It just feels, like I'm not having to carry this big weight, or at least somebody else who's shouldering the weight with me. I don't have to carry it by myself. I've yet to tell anybody something about my life and then push back and say, how dare you, or wow, that's weird. No one's ever said that. It's just me I can think that sometimes, but yeah, I thankfully have been able to move to that, and it's just caused more of a more open, lighthearted, joyful guy instead of this, shell, introvert, isolated guy that's afraid of breaking an eggshell. I've become very aware, I think, of what triggers are, and just that there's a healthy way to process and an unhealthy way to process things. And okay, now I know if I'm running to pornography, that this is an unhealthy thing, and there's something I need to process, and I'm choosing not to in a very unhealthy way. Through Celebrate Recovery and through just being vulnerable with different people, yeah, I've got a pretty strong community around me, and I'm super thankful for it, and hope to continue that. Pornography has just, it's not how I process or what I run to anymore. And I can't remember what podcast it was or pastor, but this guy says, if you believe in the forgiver of sins, you'll run to the Father rather than away from him after you've sinned. And I've always loved that because it's so true. Of course, yeah, God already has forgiven me. So why am I living like the opposite is true? Like I've got to hide from him until everything's okay, and then we can come back together, As this imperfect guy that God loves unconditionally, I'm just very thankful that God chooses to love me, and I know that I'm going to screw up, and I know He knows that, but I also know that I have 24-hour access to Him. So yeah, I see myself, as a child of the King. I do love the imagery of God running out to the prodigal and choosing to run out to me, not just waiting on me to approach him, but he sees me from afar and is sprinting out towards me. So that scene is how I see my relationship with the Lord.
Self-condemnation is a real thing. A lot of us compare ourselves with others, evaluating what's happened to us in the wrong light. We build a false identity based on wounds and trauma. We find ways to cope and cover the pain, but it's still there. What an amazing example of radical acceptance and forgiveness that we see in this story. The parents who forgave Matt for the accident are a vivid example of the unconditional love and forgiveness that God offers each one of us. We hope this story sticks with you, and that when you think of it, you are reminded of God's radical love for you that has nothing to do with what you have or haven't done. His love for you is absolute and unconditional. This is the last story in Season 2, but we'll be back again next week with a special Season 2 wrap-up episode. In our final wrap-up, we'll share some reflections on this season, as well as our personal favorites from Season 2 of the podcast. If you haven't heard all 12 stories from this season, be sure to check those out. Thanks for coming along for the ride, and we'll see you next week for the Season 2 wrap-up.
Hi, my name is Jeff, and I'm from Mena, Arkansas. I love Story Partners because it shows us real people with real problems and how Jesus transformed their reality. Story Partners is a nonprofit ministry that tells stories that point to Jesus. We tell these stories through short documentary films as well as this podcast. We're a crowd-funded ministry funded by monthly giving for people like me. To learn more or to join our crowdfunding community, visit us at storypartners.org.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Story Partners podcast. This story was recorded and edited by Walt and Annie Manus. A special thanks to Matt Slavik, who helped with the edit on this episode. If you were encouraged by it, please share it with a friend. We'll see you next time.